So today is a meaningful day, 9/11. 21 years ago, we had a major attack on American soil. And so I guess today, 9/11 can drink legally and buy cigarettes in California legally. 21 years old. And cannabis, that's right. So obviously I've been thinking a lot about violence and war, aggression. And, what's the right thing to do in the face of war, violence, and aggression? I think, we can all assume that Buddhism is about peace. Buddhism is about getting along. But Buddhism is not necessarily about finding answers. Like something came up yesterday, a question I'm sure we've all grappled with. Is violence sometimes good to end violence? Is there righteous violence? Or is there truly no time that violence is ever the right answer? And, if you look at it like we look at the precepts, the way we study the 10 precepts in Buddhism, it really is kind of an alive dance, right? The precepts, not killing, not stealing, chaste conduct, not lying, not being deluded. It doesn't mean you never kill, you never steal, you never have sex, right? That's kind of not how we see it. We see it like, killing is a part of life. It's happening all around you. What's your relationship with it? How do you interact with killing to maximize harmony and minimize suffering, right? So if you have a cockroach infestation and it's making your family sick, you kill them bitches, right? Like it's not a black and white thing. If I'm in a village and there is a bad actor in the village who's going around killing people, and we've tried all the ways to show them love and somehow heal them, and it's just not working, and they're really talented killers and they just keep killing people, we might have to kill that person. So it's not an easy practice looking at violence. It's not a black and white, clear-cut answer. What do we do with the Taliban? What do we do with Al-Qaeda? They just attacked us. Do we just bomb them to smithereens? That didn't really work. Do we try to show them love? I don't even know if we've tried that. So just wanted to kind of do a quick little investigation of how do we work with violence? How do we work with aggression? And really, I was looking this up, getting prepared for the talk, and I came across this talk/article by a teacher from Treetop Zendo in Maine, by a young teacher by the name of Jamie Heiku McLeod. And she was just like on point. I loved what she said. So I'm basically just kind of reiterating my own version of her talk. If you want to look it up, I can put it in the chat real quick, but she's super smart and sweet. Jamie Heiku McLeod, and then Google stop the fighting, and you'll probably get it. So yeah, big ups to Heiku over in Maine. She's great. So there's one main koan in our curriculum. Koans are these stories that we have that we use as practice points. Maybe some of you have heard, what's the sound of one hand clapping? That's a koan. So just these kind of illogical parables that help us in our practice to realize our true self. And we start in our curriculum, we start with 200 miscellaneous koans. And then there's a book of 50, and then another book of 100, and then another book of 100, and then another book of 100, and then you do 100 precept koans. It's like a long curriculum. But the first 200 are these miscellaneous koans, and they're usually kind of, on the short side, and they're really geared to kind of get us into this mode of getting out of our heads, stopping relying on our logical mind, and really seeing the oneness of all things, which is kind of half the battle. On one side, you have the oneness. On the one side, you have diversity. Both of those acting as one is it. But really seeing that absolute truth of oneness is really important. So these miscellaneous koans really help to guide us there. And so there's this one miscellaneous koan that simply says, stop the fighting across the river. How do we stop violence? How do we end hate? And the thing about these koans is, you're going through the curriculum with your teacher, and then you go into, interview one-on-one with the teacher, and then you have to show the answer. Like literally, you have to go into this room and show your teacher how to stop violence. No pressure. So let's look at the Buddha. Who else better than to look at the Buddha? And there's a great story in the Tripitaka, which I'll also put in the chat. The Tripitaka, also known as the Pali Canon, which is basically like the basic ancient scripture for Buddhism. It was carried forth verbally or orally, I should say, from the time of the Buddha. And then in about 29 BC, so we're talking 2,000 years ago, they start writing it down on palm leaves. So this is some ancient stuff. It's a lot of history, a lot of stories about the Buddha's life, his birth, his awakening, his teaching, his death. A lot of just kind of historical, liturgical, scriptural Buddhism is in this Tripitaka. And it's been maintained in the Pali language, which is an ancient language from back in the day. And it's very pedantic and very repetitive. But if you like history and you like scholarly stuff, it's a very interesting read, ancient stuff. And so towards the end of the Buddha's life, there was some long-term major drama going down between his clan, right? We had these clans or little tribes back in India in the day. So Buddha's clan was the Shakya clan, right? Some of us know the Buddha as Shakyamuni Buddha. Maybe you've seen that name before. Shakyamuni simply means sage of the Shakyas, right? Shakyamuni. So his clan, the Shakyas, were having all this beef with the neighboring clan, the Magda, I believe is what they were called. And there was power stuff, and there was, wrongful marriages, years and years of beef going down. To the point where the Buddha is almost 80 years old now, and the neighboring tribe, the neighboring clan is just totally set on domination and war and bathing Kapilavastu in the blood of the Shakyas, right? They are just wholeheartedly set on wiping out Buddha's clan. And obviously the Buddha doesn't want this. And so he tries his best. And he goes into the middle of the battlefield before they're about to attack, and he sits. And I haven't read the whole thing, but judging by how it goes, he's probably got lotus flowers coming out of his fingernails, and he's got light beams and peace lasers coming, all this kind of flowery stuff. He's Buddha, and he's 80. He's been practicing for 50, 60 years now. And Three times, the king of the attacking clan sees the Buddha. The Buddha tries to talk to him. He tries all of his best Buddha-ness. He says, killing only begets killing. This isn't going to solve any of your problems. Um, he says some really beautiful kind of Buddhist stuff. And three times the king or the tribe leader is like, okay, like, we all know Buddha's like famous, right? Like the whole area knows him. He's this major sage with peace lasers coming out of him. And so three times the guy's like, all right, you're right, Buddha, you're right. This probably, we won't do it. No bloodshed. But after the third time, his advisors are like, nah, man, like they did you dirty. Like we promised that we would have vengeance. And if we don't act now, they're going to keep taking advantage of us. So they're fighting on that side. And eventually the king decides to attack and wipes out Buddha's entire clan. And the Buddha can just only sit there and watch as all of his friends and his entire clan just get brutally butchered. So the Buddha dies shortly afterwards, and part of that was like his cousin betraying him. There's a whole lot of drama in the Buddha's life as well. So for anyone who thinks that Buddhahood means peace and love and everyone will love me and respect me and everyone around me will just be totally, even the Buddha himself did not have that experience. Life is suffering, even for us Buddhas. And I say us meaning all of us. So the Buddha couldn't stop the fighting. What does it mean that I'm supposed to go into this room right now in Doksan and show just little old me, show my teacher how to stop the fighting across the river? If you're really working with these koans and you really want to see into Zen, you should feel a lot of pressure here. How do I show, beyond the shadow of a doubt, how to end war right now? Kind of reminds me of another story. It's another koan, a famous one, where Nansen kills the cat. So the story opens, we're in this monastery in ancient China, and the two sides of there's like the East Wing monks and the West Wing monks, and they're fighting about a cat. We don't necessarily know what they're fighting about, but probably given the context and what we know about the times, they're probably fighting philosophically, right? Maybe they're saying, does the cat have Buddha nature or not? Or is the cat a sentient being? Or, some kind of philosophical thing. And they're fighting, and these monks are saying one thing, and these monks are saying another thing. And the abbot of the temple, Nansen, he comes in, he grabs the cat by the collar, grabs a knife, holds the knife to the cat, and he says, if any of you monks can say one turning word, I'll spare the cat. Right now, tell me, how do you stop violence? Show me. Don't think. Don't give me a war plan. Don't give me a legislative plan. Tell me right now how to stop this violence. Give me a turning word of Zen. What is your true self? What goes beyond fighting? And the monks are just like, and they don't say anything. And according to the story, trigger warning, Nansen takes the knife and cuts the cat and kills it. More than likely, this is a legend, and there was no actual killing of the cat. I just want to be clear about that. A lot of these stories with violence in them, they're most likely symbolic violence, maybe pantomime violence. But maybe it's real. I don't know. We don't really know. I just assume, non-killing is a very clear teaching of Buddhism. I doubt there was actually any killing of the cat, but the meaning of the killing is still very important. Um, so it's with that kind of pressure that we need to practice, that we need to look sincerely at what is my relationship to violence and war? How do I stop fighting? The miscellaneous koan, how do I stop the fighting across the river? So the Buddha couldn't stop war. No one's been able to stop war. There's other koans in these first 200, these miscellaneous koans. There's another one that says, stop the sound of a distant temple bell. There's another one that says, stop a sailboat. So we start to kind of see that this stopping doesn't necessarily mean ending the activity, right? If it's a distant temple bell, there's no way to stop the actual sound. The temple's miles and miles away. You can't stop a sailboat. If the wind's blowing, it's going to be sailing. If the fighting is across the river, even with Buddha, it was in his homeland, he couldn't stop it. So if the fighting is across the river, I'm obviously not going to stop it from happening. So what is this stop? Feels like it's getting at something else, right? Like there might be other ways to stop things. In one way, you can literally stop a bell by like clamping down on it. You can stop fighting by like restraining somebody, right? If they're right next to you. But there's this other kind of stop, which is kind of like stopping it from existing altogether. And the only way something can really exist is if it is separate from something else. So now we kind of start seeing that these koans are not really about stopping this or that, as much as stopping the separation of those things from myself, right? It's really getting at that oneness. So to truly be one with the temple bell, to truly be one with all sides of a fight, to be one with the soldiers that are dying in the war, is technically stopping it. It does not exist as a separate thing, right? And the Buddha is very clear. Buddhist teaching is very clear. Suffering happens because we separate. We separate concepts. I mean, just think of all the ways that we separate, right? We separate nations. We separate states. We separate parties and ideological differences. We separate neighborhoods. We separate businesses. All the way down to the very basic separation of myself as a thing. I separate myself from everything else. And it's that separation which causes suffering on all levels. And there's different reasons for separating, right? Like sometimes we separate for safety. Sometimes we separate for power and greed. Thinking about this, I'm really touched by the fact that like marginalized communities, people of color, LGBTQ, indigenous people, they're like have to separate for just survival, just for solidarity. They're forced to. It's a good thing to separate in that way. And then when you get down to the basic separation of myself, you know, there's kind of an argument, I think Yasutani Roshi talks about this, that's kind of biology. Just to exist as a human, you have to separate. If I don't separate clean water from contaminated water, I die from dysentery. If I don't separate feces from avocados, I will probably not live very long, right? So just to wake up and be a human, we have to separate ourselves. We have to come up with concepts and ideas calculate things. And this is why the first noble truth. This is why the Buddha said to live is to suffer. Because just to get out of bed in the morning and try to feed myself, I have to separate. There's no way around it. And that separating causes suffering. So then we have this practice to really get to the bottom of what that separating is. And in essence, experience this quote unquote great death. This great death of the separate me. And in that practice, using these koans, using shikantaza, using counting your breath, using communication practices, all these different tools we have to really have that firsthand experience of no self, no separation. We start to see the answer to this koan a little bit differently. We start to see that to talk about that fighting over there across the river is kind of irrelevant because it's all me. To say that, to say that anything is separate is already transgressing the reality of oneness. Their hatred over there, their battle over there. It's all separating. It's all a part of me in reality. Putin's war is my war. Dead Ukrainian soldiers are me. Proud Boys fighting for white supremacy, or whatever they say they're fighting for. That's me. Their hatred, their ignorance, their animosity, their wounds, because as we all know, hurt people hurt people. Those are mine. I know it doesn't make sense. And I know it's really hard to swallow or to conceive of the idea that I am one with the racist. I am one with the serial killer. But if you do this practice and you trust the thousands of years of people who have done this practice and say oneness, claim oneness, it includes everything. And so when we sit with this koan, stop the fighting across the river, it's really all about getting in touch with myself, my true self, my big, all-inclusive self. How do I hate? How do I spread violence? How do I perpetuate separation? And how is it that all the hate and violence that I see across the world is me? And in that way, truly being one with all of it, in that way we can truly stop the fighting. And that's in the absolute way, right? Like I said, this absolute reality of being one with everything, that's one side. Sorry, we're having an amazing choir of dogs and sirens right now. Can you guys hear that at home? They're harmonizing. It's great. One with the howling. So having this experience of oneness is difficult, and it's counterintuitive, and it's not logical. It's very experiential, and it's kind of like the first step, getting in touch with that absolute reality. The other step, the continuous step, I should say, is manifesting that within the relative world of diversity and difference, right? Because there is a country called Russia and there is a country called Ukraine, and they're far away and I can't be there right now. And there are rivers between me and them. There are parties, political parties. I do vote one way, I do not vote the other way, right? So there is this phenomenal reality. And so, how to manifest this absolute oneness within the relative reality is our practice. That's the ongoing practice forever and ever and ever. And so in that way, there's kind of two ways to stop the fighting, right? This one koan, when we're working on it, is really focusing on that first way. How do you stop separating from anything, from fighting, from temple bells, from a cat in the temple? And then on the other hand, with that experience, how do I actually try to cultivate peace in the phenomenal world around me? And, you know, there's lots of ways. And each one of us with our karma and our specific path and conditions of our life can manifest it in different ways. You know, everything from like being a world leader and actually like going to the UN and making policy change, all the way to being nice to your neighbor and not fighting with your neighbor next door. All of us can assume our role fully and manifest non-fighting in our life. And the best way to do that is the three tenets, right? We always talk about that, the three tenets of the Zen peacemakers. So really quickly, not knowing, bearing witness, and then action. So not knowing is this kind of absolute place, getting rid of our concepts, getting rid of separation, and approaching everything from this place of just complete vastness, not knowing, no concepts, no separation, total inclusion of everything. And then from that place, bearing witness to everything, bearing witness to the hatred and violence that I have within me, bearing witness to the hatred and violence I see elsewhere, and really truly bearing witness from a place of not knowing, the right action comes of itself, reveals itself, makes itself clear. And in that way, we can take action without perpetuating even more hatred, right? Like this lady, or this teacher, Jamie Heiku McLeod, who I've basically been quoting this whole time, she tells stories about how, you know, she woke up to the fact that she was in all of these activist groups, these socialist groups, these feminist groups, and they were all super hateful, and they were yelling, and they were throwing things, and they were demonizing the other side. And that was a big awakening for her, as she talks about it, that that's not really going to get it done. You know, like I said at the beginning, maybe in some circumstances it does. Maybe sometimes you just have to use aggression. But, you know, Heiku here talks about it wasn't really working. Fighting bad stuff with hatred. So I think using these three tenets, not knowing, complete openness and emptiness, just letting go of all my preconceived notions, and then just bearing witness from that place of emptiness, I think the loving action comes forward. And maybe that's being firm, maybe that's being aggressive with somebody. Maybe you jerk your kid away from the stove when they're going to touch it when it's hot. That's appropriate. But coming at it, realizing that all the fighting, all the war, all the hatred is me. That's the hard part, and I think the crucial part. So, good luck stopping the fighting in your own life.